It started with two women stepping off a plane at Stansted Airport. Fresh from Bangkok, the flight had landed without fuss. But something wasn't right. Customs officers noticed the bags, heavy, almost too heavy. The two women kept their cool, but the tension crackled just beneath the surface. As the suitcases were unzipped, officers were hit with the unmistakable smell of cannabis. 60 kilos of it. Estimated street value over £600,000. In the days that followed, digital breadcrumbs began to surface. WhatsApp chats, voice notes, and coded messages. And slowly, a name began to rise from the smoke. Not a cartel kingpin, not a lifelong gangster, but Jay Emmanuel-Thomas, a footballer who once played in front of thousands for Arsenal, Ipswich, and Bristol City. A man with Premier League dreams, now facing prison reality. This is the story of how a promising athlete, once tipped for greatness, became the architect of an international drug importation plot, and how the game finally caught up with him. Jay Emmanuel-Thomas wasn't just another name on a team sheet. Born in East London, raised in Forest Gate, he was a football prodigy by the age of 8. Arsenal spotted him early. By 16, he was captain in their youth side, scoring, assisting, leading. Fans called him Jet, a nod to his initials and explosive style. He made his Premier League debut at 19. Arsenal, Blackpool, Ipswich, Bristol City, he was never short on contracts. Coaches praised his versatility. He could play up front, on the wing, even in midfield. But there was always something missing. Something holding him back from superstardom. A lack of consistency, a quiet fade, and just like that, the rise began to slow. By his late 20s, Emmanuel had drifted through 10 clubs, playing as far away as Thailand and India. The crowds got smaller, the headlines fewer. A career that once promised so much had become a patchwork of missed chances and fading spotlights. And it's here, in the silence between transfers, in the downtime between matches, that something changed. The name on the back of his shirt was still his, but the man wearing it had changed. He wasn't chasing goals anymore. He was chasing something else, something darker. By the time he returned to the UK in early 2023, Emmanuel-Thomas was no longer training for match day. He was coordinating shipments, plotting logistics, using his influence to set up a smuggling operation worth more than most playing contracts. And in a flat in East London, behind a locked phone screen, the game had already begun. Only this time, the stakes weren't trophies. They were years behind bars. It didn't look like a criminal empire, just a quiet flat in Chigwell, northeast London. A footballer between clubs, living in a comfortable home, working on fitness and next steps. But under the surface, a different plan was taking shape. Less about contracts and match fitness, more about concealment, weight, and return on investment. Jay Emmanuel-Thomas wasn't acting alone. He was part of a network, one with direct ties to Thailand, a known hotspot for cannabis exports. While the UK still criminalised it, cannabis in Thailand had recently been decriminalised, a grey market paradise for traffickers. The plan was simple: fly product out under the guise of tourism, land back with tightly packed bricks of high-grade cannabis, vacuum sealed in suitcases, and hand it off on arrival. But Emmanuel wasn't the one flying. That's what made it slick. He recruited mules, women with clean records and credible backstories. They weren't hardened criminals. They were couriers, dressed as holiday makers, coached on what to say, how to act, and how to walk through customs with a smile. and in March 2023, two of them had boarded a flight from Bangkok to Stansted, carrying over 60 kilos of cannabis between them. But customs officers were watching. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was intel, but something about the bags, they were too heavy, too new. They raised suspicion. The officers ran them through screening. Dense, brick-shaped anomalies lit up the scanner. When the zip was pulled, the room filled with the thick, pungent aroma of raw cannabis. Not personal use, not even street-level distribution. This was high-volume export, packaged, measured, and branded. The women were arrested on the spot. Nervous, cooperative, but when phones were seized, the story deepened. Inside one of the women's WhatsApp histories was a voice note. A familiar voice giving instructions on when to move, what to carry, and how to behave at immigration. The number was traced. It led directly back to Jay Emmanuel-Thomas. At first, there was disbelief, a former Premier League star involved in trafficking. But the messages kept coming, payments arranged, pickups coordinated, contacts logged. The evidence was mounting. And just like that, the man who once walked out under stadium floodlights was now walking straight into the crosshairs of a full-scale National Crime Agency investigation. It was just after 7 a.m. when the door came off its hinges. Jay Emmanuel-Thomas was at home in East London, not expecting visitors. No knock, no warning, just a team from the National Crime Agency. Tactical gloves, rifles raised, voices sharp. Within seconds, the former footballer was face down on his kitchen floor, wrists bound in plastic cuffs, still in his dressing gown. From the outside, it looked like a regular property. Inside, it was something else. Agents moved methodically, searching cupboards, drawers, every corner of the flat. They weren't looking for cannabis. They were looking for proof, evidence of coordination, links to the two women caught at Stansted. Anything that could prove this wasn't just a case of personal consumption or one bad mistake. They found what they were looking for almost immediately. 2 mobile phones, one encrypted, one not. The regular phone held bank transfers and text messages, notes about flights, addresses, even packaging instructions. The encrypted device revealed even more. Voice notes, directions to a pickup point, and one very clear message that read, "Same process as last time, make sure they keep calm." That was the moment the room shifted. For the agents, it confirmed what they already suspected. This was organised. This wasn't just a disgraced athlete dabbling in small-time deals. This was structure, delegation, intent. As Jay sat across from the investigators in the interview room later that day, he looked composed, calm. But behind the mirrored glass, officers were already assembling the case. When they showed him the messages, the ones arranging drop-offs, payment splits, and risk planning, he hesitated. Not full denial, not full confession, just a long pause and a deep breath. Then came the moment that turned the investigation. One of the officers leaned forward and asked, "Do you really think people won't talk just because you used to play in the Premier League?" Jay's response? Silence. The kind that only says one thing: guilt. With Jay Emmanuel-Thomas in custody, investigators began connecting the dots, pulling together evidence from months of digital surveillance, custom reports, flight logs, and financial trails. The first thread, the women at Stansted Airport. One of them cracked within 48 hours. She admitted they'd been recruited to act as mules and were promised a cut of the profit if they carried the suitcases from Thailand to London without asking questions. But buried in her confession was something more damning. She hadn't packed the bags herself. The second thread, a WhatsApp group innocently titled The Network. On the surface, it looked like a football banter chat, but tucked between memes and emojis were references to training sessions, drop points, and kits. One message even read, £300 per kilo, 2-day return. That wasn't football slang, it was smuggling code. But the real nail in the coffin came from CCTV footage. Investigators had managed to trace one of the women's trips before the flight. In footage from an East London hotel lobby, she was seen checking in with a man in a grey hoodie. That man was later identified, through facial recognition, as Jay Emmanuel himself. Next came the financial records. Jay wasn't flashy with his money anymore, but his bank accounts told a different story. Unexplained cash deposits, multiple transfers to overseas accounts, and a flurry of activity just days before the flight. It all pointed in one direction. This wasn't a random, one-off scheme. It was a structured operation, and Jay wasn't just a foot soldier. He was calling the plays. When confronted with this web of evidence, Jay still said nothing. No confession, no statement, just the same icy stare. But he didn't need to speak. The evidence was already screaming. On October 24, 2024, Jay Emmanuel-Thomas stood before the judge at Chelmsford Crown Court, no longer dressed in training kits or matchday suits, but in a prison-issued tracksuit, flanked by security guards instead of teammates. The court was packed, not with fans, but with reporters, law enforcement, and a few scattered onlookers, still struggling to believe how far this once promising footballer had fallen. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid out the operation in full. Hundreds of kilos of cannabis smuggled from Bangkok to the UK, with a street value of over £1 million. They detailed how Jay had coordinated travel plans, used his relationship with the women as leverage, and tried to stay 2 steps removed, until digital evidence dragged him back in. WhatsApp messages, voice notes, bank transfers, all of it painted a clear picture. This wasn't a moment of desperation. It was calculated, it was organised, and it was criminal. Jay didn't speak during sentencing. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet stare as the judge called it a clear abuse of privilege by someone who once had the world at his feet. The trial lasted until May of 2025, at which stage he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. His co-defendants, including the 2 women caught at Stansted, also received jail time, though slightly reduced due to their cooperation, but the damage was already done. The football world reeled. Former teammates expressed shock, coaches avoided comment, and fans flooded social media, some with anger, others with sympathy, most with disbelief. How does a Premier League player end up here? One post read. He had it all. Jay's fall from grace became a cautionary tale, not just in football, but in fame, opportunity, and the choices made behind closed doors. Once a name read aloud in stadiums, now just another headline in the courts. Jay Emmanuel-Thomas once trained at Arsenal's elite academy, played under the stadium lights, and carried the promise of a bright football future. But his story didn't end with trophies or transfer deals. It ended in a cold prison cell, behind headlines that now define his legacy. And that's what makes this case so haunting. Because this wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a conscious descent. A man who once had everything, who stood at the edge of greatness, choosing shortcuts with people who saw his status as a tool, not a talent. Whether it was greed, ego, or simply poor judgment, one decision spiraled into another, and soon the pitch was replaced by smuggling routes, voice notes, and vacuum-sealed bricks of cannabis. What makes this story resonate is its raw simplicity. Anyone, no matter how celebrated or gifted, is only ever one bad choice away from collapse. In the end, Jay's story isn't about drugs. It's about potential squandered, fame wasted, and how no amount of past success can shield you from your present consequences. He wasn't a kingpin. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a man with chances, more than most, who threw them away. And for that, the silence of a packed courtroom said more than any final whistle ever could.